Bertie!
Oi, pessoal. Bem-vindos ao meu stream. Bem-vindos ao meu stream. Bem-vindos ao Anime World. Estamos a fazer stream de anime na One Piece. Os capítulos de do Wano the Arc de Kaido. Bem, vamos agora ver a coisa. Vamos agora ver o anime.
Shall we go? I'm in no mood to speculate. Yeah, that's why.
And constricts him, breaking his bones and crushing him. However, Queen accidentally fires missiles at himself, freeing Sanji from his grasp. Strangely, Sanji gets up and finds that he was harmed by Queen's attack. Although they're broken and dented, he is able to pound his body back into place. Queen attempts to behead Sanji, only for the blade to shatter against Sanji's neck and cause him only minor pain. Sanji realizes that he may have genetic enhancements just like his siblings. Killer continues his battle against Hawkins, but the battle is not in his favor. Thanks to his devil fruit abilities, Hawkins has total immunity from Killer's attacks, with the damage inflicted being redirected to Kid. Killer's subordinates arrive to his aid, but Killer refuses to attack Hawkins. So Hawkins decides to harm Kid himself by the damage is redirected to Kid's head, proving especially disadvantageous to Kid due to his battle with Big Mom. When Killer declares that Kid will become the Pirate King, this angers Hawkins, causing him to ruthlessly beat Killer. With a single attack, Killer slices off Hawkins' left arm. Because Kid lost his left arm prior, the attack leaves him totally unharmed. Instead, Hawkins loses his own arm. Killer pulls the straw doll out of Hawkins' severed arm and destroys it, undoing the damage dealt to Kid's body. Hawkins no longer has any people left to redirect damage to and is now completely vulnerable to attacks. In a last-ditch effort, Hawkins draws a tarot card. He reveals the Death card upright, summoning a giant straw monster. Killer decapitates the monster with the Zanshu claw move, instantly destroying it. Hawkins draws a second card, only to find to his horror that he drew the Tower card. With this, Killer sliced Hawkins with Jin Sonic, defeating him and causing him to collapse. The Tower card is assigned two meanings, the death of the old and a new path. After Queen's blade shatters upon contact with Sanji's neck, Sanji realizes that he may have scientific enhancements just like his siblings. Even when his enemies shoot him with firearms, he survives uninjured. Still, he denies his abilities due to contempt of his old family. X-Drake continues his battle against combatant beast pirates when he is confronted by Scratchman Apu. Apu suggests an underhanded proposition. Given that both sides of the battle would be heavily damaged after the raid, Apu suggests the formation of an alliance to defeat the weakened victor after the battle concludes. On his side are three numbers, Inbi, Fuga, and Zanki. Drake is uninterested by this offer, untrusting of Apu. Tama and her tamed beast pirates try to escape the fire, but they come face to face with Kinemon's lower body. Apparently, he survived his defeat at Kaido's hands as he had already been bifurcated by law. While his upper body remains in the attic attempting to wake up Kiku, his lower body looks for allies. His lower body can communicate, but cannot hear others because his ears are on his other half. He reunites with Nami's group after she traces the reverse crescent on his leg, allowing him to identify her as an ally. On the third floor, Brooke continues to escort Robin away, but is confronted by Guernica and the members of CP0. Guernica attempts to capture Robin, but Mink combatants come to her support. Kanjuro reveals to have also survived his defeat and is in contact with Orochi. On Orochi's order, Kanjuro decides to give a final performance using his Devil Fruit ability. To symbolize the burning hatred of the Kurozumi family, he uses Kazenbo. He draws and creates a large ghost-like entity wreathed in flames. The monster passes through walls and sets everything it touches on fire. Shortly after creating the monster, Kanjuro collapses, finally succumbing to his injuries. The Marys announce that the Skull Dome is now on fire. Sanji continues his battle against Queen, Zoro battles fiercely against King in the air, and Luffy and Kaido continue their combat on the roof of the Skull Dome. As Momonosuke attempts to create the flame, Clouds needed to stop Onigashima, Yamato runs to the armory to secure the explosives. However, on Orochi's command, Kanjuro's fire monster also heads towards the armory to ignite the explosives to destroy the island. Yamato gets to the armory first and heads to the door. Meanwhile, Law and Kid continue their battle against Big Mom, but their attacks are futile because of her homies. So they decide to carry out an ace card, their awakened powers. After the castle is devastated by Big Mom's Ikoku, Law his awakened powers, allowing him to coat objects with room. He coats his sword, inserts it into Big Mom's neck, and unleashes Shock Willow, striking her with an electrical shock. Kid uses his awakened powers, allowing him to make other objects magnetic. He makes Big Mom magnetic, causing objects including Napoleon to fly towards her. Then he magnetizes the castle's pillars, causing them to strike her and crush her. Although Big Mom was finally damaged for the first time in the battle, she survived the entire attack, now enraged. Using Soul Pocus, she steals the lifespans of the soldiers, using the souls to create homies. Then she consumed an entire year's worth of her own lifespan, her to grow to a gigantic size. Apu tries to convince X-Drake to team up against Kaido after the Emperor defeats Luffy. He states that Kaido has never been weakened like this, so now is the time to defeat him. However, X-Drake rejects his offer and attacks Apu instead. The skirmish is interrupted by Yamato, who is in a hurry to go to the armory and stop Onigashima from exploding. Elsewhere, CP0 agents have come to take Nico Robin. However, the Minks attack the agents as a distraction, allowing Brooke and Robin to escape. Meanwhile, Sanji is fleeing from his fight against Queen after he noticed that his body had started mutating. His fears of turning into a cold-blooded Germa soldier like his brothers is slowly taking over him. He fails to notice a lady calling to him for help, and he only regains his senses when he sees the said lady on the floor bleeding and looking at him in terror. He rushes to help her, but she begs him not to come closer. Osum, as the woman is called, rushes to a nearby room where other geishas have been hiding. Sanji again offers to help Osum, but the other women chastise him for hurting a defenseless woman. The women drive him outside their hiding place where he finds Queen, who had been looking for him. Sanji is shaken by the thought of possibly striking a woman. He comes to the realization that his mutation was brought about by his use of his Germa suit. He wonders if Luffy would rather have an unreliable crewmate who is helpless against women, or a cruel and heartless warrior who is able to bring anybody's head when he's ordered. He ponders what the future Pirate King needs and decides to destroy his Germa suit. Using a Denden Mushi, Sanji calls Zoro, who is in the middle of his fight against King. Unsure if his mutation will change him for good, he asks the swordsman once the battle is won to kill him if he ever loses his humanity. Zoro gladly accepts and tells Sanji not to die before then. Shortly after, Sanji turns seemingly invisible and hits Queen with his Hell Memories attack. An angered Big Mom promises to inflict unspeakable pain towards Law and Kid. She sicks her homies on the two, which they barely fend off. Meanwhile, Kezenbo is wreaking havoc and burning everything on its path. Samurai and Beast pirates all flee in a panic. Elsewhere, Brooke and Robin are on the run with the CP0 hot on their tail. Yamato is still charging his way towards the armory, hoping to reach the bomb stored there before Kezenbo reaches them. In the treasure repository, Orochi listens with excitement to the chaos brought about by Kezenbo, which was created to exact vengeance in the name of the Kurozami clan. Suddenly, he hears a shamisen playing nearby. He is drawn to the sound, which reminds him of his beloved Komurasaki. Outside, a determined Momonosuke is frantically creating flame clouds to prevent Onigashima from crashing down onto the flower capital. Zoro and King are still in battle. Zoro is overwhelmed by King's attacks, which he deems to be unblockable. He notices the flames on King's back, and wonders out loud if this is an ability from his devil fruit. King hears this and answers that it is not a feature of the Pteranodon. Zoro attacks with 3-sword style, Black Rope Dragon Twister, but King easily overcomes this. Zoro is at a loss at how durable King is, noting that it must be because of his dinosaur devil fruit. King agrees, but hints that it might also be because he is also a little unique. Zoro concludes that King's durability, wings, and flames are a feature of a tribe that is unknown to him. Zoro is knocked down and exhausted. All of a sudden, Zoro hears the sound of a shamisen, which causes Enma to start draining his haki and emaciate his arm. Inside, Orochi crawls towards the shamisen player and sees Komurasaki alive and well. He cries out in tears while she greets him with a smile. Kazenbo continues to make its way down to the armory. The beast pirates and samurai try in vain to stop its descent. Yamato realizes that the Flame Spectre is moving through walls and that it will be reaching the armory soon. He urgently moves faster, enlisting the help of the numbers Fuga. Atop Fuga's head are Brook and Robin. Knowing that the CP0 are just behind the flames, they hop off and quickly put distance between them and the agents. The CP0, still in pursuit, are stopped when their pictures are taken by Apu, who plans to sell the photos to Morgans of the World Economy newspaper. After Apu reveals his plans, one of agents attacks him using his Shigen technique. The agent then turns his sights onto X-Drake and attacks him using the same technique. He is, however, stopped by Apu, who survived by defending himself using Busoshoku Haki. Apu uses Scratch Boom, which sends the agent flying. X-Drake suggests that they team up to take down the CP0 agents, and Apu gladly accepts. Meanwhile, Onigashima is inching closer towards the flower capital. Momonosuke is still creating flame clouds to prevent the floating island from crashing. He remembers his promise to Luffy, Yamato, and the citizens of Wano, and the reason why he asked Shinobu to aid him. He is determined not to betray this promise and keep everyone safe. Inside, Komurasaki plays her shamisen while Orochi watches tearfully. The sound of the shamisen causes Enma to drain Zoro's haki. Seeing Zoro trying to stop Enma from fully draining him, King mocks how Zoro is having a falling out with his friend. The two continue their clash, with King continuously ridiculing and insulting Zoro. Elsewhere, Sanji attacks Queen with Hell Memories, which sends the latter flying. However, the All-Star laughs it off, expressing his disappointment that he was not able to see Sanji use his Germa suit. Queen proceeds to provoke Sanji, calling him mentally weak for asking Zoro for help. He tells Sanji that Zoro isn't any better, and that he will not be able to defeat King since King is a Lunarian, a race people once revered as gods. Sanji brushes this off, asking how gods managed to become extinct. Zoro is at a loss at how to defeat King. He attacks using his one-sword style EE, Death Lion's Song, an attack he deems to be stronger than his previous attacks. However, this does not cause any damage to King. Zoro hears the shamisen, and once again, Enma drains his haki. At the same time, King attacks Zoro with Tempurauden and lands a hit on Zoro. This hit causes Zoro to let go of his swords. King notes that this is the first time he has ever seen a swordsman being held back by his own swords. Zoro falls and tries to retrieve his blades. He recalls the day he obtained Sandai Kitetsu, the cursed sword forged by Tenguyama Hitetsu. King attacks Zoro in midair, which sends him crashing onto the side of the floating island. There he finds Wado Ichimonji, the sword of Kuina, his childhood friend. In a flashback, Hitetsu explains that Enma and Wado Ichimonji were forged by the same person, the legendary swordsmith, Shimotsuki Kozaburo. This is why Enma fits comfortably in Zoro's hand. These memories make Zoro question how a sword from the land of Wano ended up in a remote region in the East Blue. Zoro retrieves two of his swords and proceeds to attack King. The two engage in an intense exchange of blows. King launches his Barizodon attack. Zoro senses Enma nearby and immediately lunges to retrieve it. As Zoro grabs Enma, it immediately drains his haki, emaciating his arm. King attacks him relentlessly and he barely manages to block the Lunarian's slashes. Zoro falls and Enma continues to drain him. Zoro recalls how he learned of the battle cry, Sunyachi, and how Momonosuke was prohibited from uttering such cry. He explained to the young daimyo that he learned it from an old man from his village a long time ago. He remembers the old man who was always on the seacoast. He also recalls Hitetsu explaining that his two swords, Wado Ichimonji and Enma, were both forged by the legendary swordsmith, Shimotsuki Kozaburo. Zoro remembers events in a village in East Blue 13 years ago. A young Zoro was training with Kuina, his childhood friend, at the Ishin Dojo. Kuina easily disarmed him and knocked him down. Determined to best his rival, Zoro went to the coast to train. There he saw an old man looking towards the sea. Sensing that Zoro was a bit down, the old man taught him of the battle cry, Tsunachi, which according to him was a good luck word to uplift one's spirit. Zoro told him that he had no use for such a weird word, but asked the old man if he was a samurai. Everyone at the dojo said so. Instead of answering, the old man told Zoro to pay the god no mind. He then told the young boy that the Marines would be invading their village soon, but he refused to tell him why and told him to go home. Instead of going home, however, Zoro started training while the old man watched on. After Zoro explained why he was training hard, the old man offered to give Zoro 2 of his swords that he forged himself. He explained they were blunt, so Zoro could use them for practice. The old man explained that swords were made to kill. Every sword had a personality, and that it was a swordsman's job to tame them. He went on to say that a cursed sword is a fine sword, and was simply called as such because the weak feared it. The old man recalled a sword that he forged when he was younger. He deemed it the greatest piece that he crafted in his life. Just by holding it, the blade would give the bearer chills, thus he dubbed it the Great King of Hell. Remembering all these, Zoro realizes that the aforementioned sword, the Great King of Hell, was none other than Enma. Outside, Momonosuke accidentally grasps Kaido's flame clouds. He realizes that since he is also a dragon, he can also control and manipulate the clouds. He proceeds to try and divert Onegashima's path. Meanwhile, Zoro pieces together the clues to the history of his village. It was not a coincidence that the village was named Shimotsuki. Hitetsu mentioned that Shimotsuki Kozaburo had left Wano more than 50 years ago. With all this information and his memories, Zoro deduces that the old man and Kozaburo are one and the same. He remembers Kozaburo explaining that it is the sword that chooses its wielder. With that, Zoro understood that Enma chose him and was simply testing him. He recalls one night when he was younger and had challenged Kuina to their 2001st duel, all of which were won by the latter. Zoro cried in frustration, but Kuina told him that it is she who should be frustrated. Her father had told her that as a girl, she could never surpass a man as a swordsman. She envied Zoro for being a boy since she too wanted to become the world's greatest. Hearing Kuina utter those words angered Zoro since he was aiming to surpass her, and saying that was insulting all the hard training he was doing. With this, the two made a pact to become the world's greatest swordsman. The following day, Kuina died after falling down a flight of stairs. Distraught, Zoro begged Kuina's father to give him Kuina's sword, also promising to be so strong that his name reached her in heaven. Back to the present, Zoro realizes that Enma was not draining him out of malice and admits that he was simply lacking, thus unable to withstand the sword, unlike Odin, who had been using it with ease, even though the sword took away so much of his haki. Zoro tries to figure out how to control the flow of his haki and keep it from being depleted and ultimately causing his death. Rather than fighting the sword's effects, he decides to let Enma take his haki instead and conquers it, unleashing his Haoshoku haki and rendering the nearby beast pirates unconscious. King notices and asks if he was trying to be a king. Zoro answers by saying that he just remembered his promise to Luffy and Kuina. Sanji continues his battle against Queen. After Sanji destroys his raid suit, Queen decides to continue on with the battle. This time he demonstrates his scientific enhancements and uses techniques from Sanji's brothers. He uses Ichiji's sparking red ability to fire laser eyes, Sparking Queen, Niji's Dengeki Blue to strike Sanji with electricity, Henry Queen, and Yanji's Winch Green ability to use his retractable arm as a winch, grabbing Sanji and spinning him in the air, Winch Queen. He reveals that he had a rivalry with Judge, and his goal is to outperform Germa 66. Before he could slam Sanji into the ground, however, Sanji uses a Diablo Yambi-infused kick to destroy Queen's mechanical arm. In fury, Queen uses Sanji's stealth black ability to turn himself invisible to catch him off guard. However, Sanji uses Soru, allowing him to turn effectively invisible to Queen but physically taxing him. Queen plans to wait for him to exhaust himself, then strike him unexpectedly. Sanji perches on a wall looking for his next approach. Sum, the woman who Sanji accidentally attacked earlier, has her wounds bandaged and healed. However, the room where she and the other geishas were hiding are destroyed during the battle. The geishas decide to evacuate, but Sum's pet mouse, Chuji, is missing, so Sum stays behind to look for it. Sum follows Chuji dangerously into the battlefield, unaware of Queen's presence. Queen recognizes her. He had visited the pleasure hall numerous times in the past to request her services, but she repeatedly turned him down using sickness as an excuse. Seeing her healthy, Queen realizes that he had been lied to. Infuriated, he strikes Sum in anger. Seeing Queen attack a woman infuriates Sanji, allowing him to use a new ability. Using his strong exoskeleton to protect his body and coating his Diable Jambe flames with Busoshoku Haki, he is able to turn the flames into hotter blue flames called Ifrit Jambe. This gives him added agility and greater kicking power against Queen. He strikes Queen in a set of attacks, knocking him into the ground. Queen gets up, preparing his retaliation. Remembering his past and accepting the scientific advancements given to him by Germa 66, Sanji uses Buff Burst against Queen, sending a powerful flaming kick into Queen's stomach and defeating him. Queen's unconscious body is sent flying out of the Skull Dome and off Onigashima, falling into the mainland below. Emerging victorious from his battle, Sanji returns Chuji to Sum, then collapses from his injuries. King had asked Zoro if he was trying to be a king, but Zoro tells him that he was simply remembering his promise to his captain and his best friend. King scoffs at this, saying that so long as he and Kaido were around, Zoro's promise will never be fulfilled. With that, the two continue their battle, exchanging blow after blow. Zoro is exhausted, but King is still unscathed. King mocks his attempts and tells him that his sword attacks will not work against him. King is now on the offensive. Zoro tries to analyze their battle while he is parrying King's attacks. He knows that he is slashing King, but his slashes are not affecting him at all. Zoro uses his three-sword style, Ultra Tiger Hunt attack, while infusing his swords with Haoshoku Haki. The attack manages to make King bleed and also rips up the All-Star's mask. Zoro finally figures out that King's durability and speed are directly linked to the flames on his back. That once the said flames go out, King's speed increases, but his defense gets weaker. A couple of beast pirates see King without his mask, and observe that he has black wings, white hair, and brown skin. They say that he is of a race so rare that the world government awards 100 million to those with information about their existence. King overhears this and burns them to death. King and Zoro continue their battle outside the Skull Dome. King finally acknowledges Zoro's strength danger he poses. Zoro accepts the compliment and vows to end Kaido's and the beast pirates' reign. King rebuffs this and declares that Kaido will be the king of the pirates. Zoro rejects this declaration and attacks with King of Hell, three-sword style, Rengoku Onigiri. King recalls the first time he met Kaido on Punk Hazard many years ago. The younger Kaido was a guinea pig of the world government and had just escaped. While making his way out of the laboratory, he saw a young man engulfed by fire after undergoing a durability test. Kaido surmised that he was a Lunarian, given his ability to withstand the raging fire. Kaido told the young man that he was going to form a new pirate group and offered him a chance to make the not-so-fascinating world fascinating. The man accepted the offer after Kaido guaranteed that he would change the world. After making their escape, Kaido asked the man his name and he answered that it was Albur. After noting how strong Albur was, Kaido told him that he should be named King instead. Kaido promised King that he would never betray him, and made him his right-hand man. Back in the present, Zoro's attack is ineffective, and King counters with Imperial Flaming Wings, which sends magma-like flames onto Zoro. King then strikes Zoro using his burning sword, which Zoro blocks. Refusing to lose any of his swords, Zoro releases a burst of Haki which sends the two of them flying. Zoro is unable to see King, suspecting that the flames on King's back are out since the Lunarian is moving at an incredible speed. Knowing that King is not invulnerable at this state, Zoro attacks using Yakadori, knocking King back. King realizes that Zoro has figured out the mechanics to his strength, and Zoro finally sees a window to King's defeat. Zoro uses his Ultoragari technique, but King blocks the attack despite having his flames on. Zoro taunts King for blocking his attack, but King retorts that Zoro is biologically incapable of defeating him. He then launches his Imperial Flaming Wings attack, which sends a multitude of magma-like streams onto Zoro. The flames try to engulf Zoro, but he cuts them down while he makes his way towards King. Zoro attacks with King of Hell, three-sword serpent, 103 Mercy's Dragon Damnation, and King counters with his extra-large Imperial Flaming Wings. The clash sends a shockwave throughout Onigashima. King's sword is broken and his right wing is ripped apart. As King's consciousness fades, he thinks of his captain. He had thought of Kaido as the prophesized Joy Boy. Thankful for the life Kaido gave to him, he asked his captain to remain the strongest. He also promised that he would never lose so that he can make Kaido the king of the pirates. At the same time, Zoro, too, recalls his vow to become the world's greatest swordsman, a vow he made to Luffy, the man who he declared will become the Pirate King. King falls off Onigashima, and Zoro lost his consciousness after defeating the Lunarian. Ameri announces King's loss to a CP-0 agent. The agent now assesses the situation to be dire as all of the Beast Pirates All-Stars and Tobarapo members have lost. He notes that only Big Mom and Kaido stand in the way of the Straw Hats' victory. Kaido and Luffy's battle is reaching its climax, however. If Luffy wins, Kaido will lose control over his flame clouds, which are keeping Onigashima afloat. The floating island will crash, and the explosives in the basement will cause the flower capital to explode. Momonosuke, now able to control Kaido's flame clouds, tries to pull Onigashima away to safety. Kazenbo, a flame specter, is continuing to make its way to the basement with the purpose of making Onigashima explode midair. Yamato, determined to prevent this from happening, finally reaches the door to the basement armory. With the help of Fuga, the doors are opened and Yamato rushes through. Meanwhile, Usopp finds Kinemon and Kiku, who are both incapacitated. Beast pirates come in droves to capture them, and Usopp tries to fight back. The two samurai ask him to leave them behind, but Usopp chides them for their so-called honor and tells them to hold on to life instead, even with snot dripping from their faces. A few moments later, Izu arrives to stave off the pursuers while Usopp, Kinemon, and Kiku escape on Hamlet's back. On the third floor of the Skull Dome, Fukurokuju and Raizo are in a standoff as the two cast Ninpo, paralysis jutsu at the same time. Neither one of them budge, even though the whole floor is being engulfed in flames. On the second floor, Komurasaki continues to play her shamisen as Orochi listens on, ecstatic that his love, who he thought had died, is alive and well. In his bliss, he is hopeful that all his enemies will be wiped out and he and Komurasaki will get married and spend the rest of their days in Wano. He asks Komurasaki to play his favorite piece, and Komurasaki indulges him. Meanwhile, X-Drake and Apu are defeated by the CP0. Drake is knocked out and Apu runs away. The agents are apprised of the defeat of the All-Stars and are ordered to leave Onigashima. On the rooftop, Luffy and Kaido deal their Haoshoku haki-coded attacks. Luffy lunges forward, but Kaido bats him away with his Hasaikai. Luffy uses his Gear 3 and attacks with his rock gun technique. Kaido is knocked down, and the impact of the attack also causes Luffy to fall to his back. Both are exhausted as they try to catch their breath while lying on the ground. The two stand back up with smiles on their faces. Luffy laughs as he tells Kaido that it is starting to get fun, and with a huge grin on his face, Kaido tells him that he feels the same way. While the battle between Kaido and Luffy is taking place at the rooftop of the Skull Dome, Momonosuke is desperate to steer Onigashima away from the Flower Capital, where its citizens are oblivious to the catastrophe that could befall them. In the Flower Capital, the people are drinking their fill and dancing to the music. They send lanterns to the sky, with their wishes written on them so that they may reach heaven. In hers, Toko writes that she wants to see her adoptive father again, which breaks Hitetsu's heart. Back at the rooftop, Kaido looks at the beautiful night sky and takes out a barrel full of sake and takes huge gulps of the alcohol. Luffy is angry that he is drinking while they are fighting. Kaido tells him that it is because he is having fun. Today is the Fire Festival, and they had planned a banquet on Onigashima, but Luffy and the others messed it all up. He offers some booze to Luffy, but the latter refuses and declares instead that he'll have a banquet of his own after he beats Kaido. Kaido releases a huge amount of haki and tells Luffy that he hopes he can have a nice big banquet. Luffy is angered once more, seeing that Kaido is now drunk. Indignant at the accusation, Kaido throws the barrel of sake down and then weeps at his ruined banquet. He proceeds to hiccup and laugh while staggering around, barely able to keep standing upright. Incensed at the sight of a drunk Kaido, Luffy charges at him. However, Kaido easily evades him and attacks using his lightning-hammered Ragnaraku technique. Luffy receives a direct hit, and a shockwave is felt throughout the rooftop. Now in his dragon form, a drunk, weeping Kaido laments that even though he is having fun, the battle has already destroyed half of his castle, which took 5 years to build. Kaido continues to wail about his woes while attacking Luffy using his drunken techniques. Luffy continues to retaliate and finally lands a kick to his stomach, which causes Kaido to cough up blood. Meanwhile, in Mary Joaz, the 5 elders complain how this year's Leveille is cursed. They mention that it resulted in the total abolition of the 7 warlords of the sea, an incident concerning the Arabasta kingdom, and the Revolutionary Army's infiltration of Mary Joaz. The blonde elder says that they need to set those aside for now, and immediately deal with what is happening in the land of Wano. He is expectant that the CP0 have captured Nico Robin by now, and that the battles involving Big Mom and Kaido will result to death. He mentions of the need to erase the existence of a certain devil fruit. Another elder rebuffs its existence, saying that the said fruit is a mere legend even to them as it has not awakened for centuries. However, the blonde elder says that the world government would not have bothered giving that devil fruit another name if they did not want to hide it. At the seas just outside of Wano, a fleet of marine ships are on standby awaiting orders. A scout sees a giant shadow and uses a Denden Mushi to report this to his superior. He describes the shadow as an island. At a distance, a silhouette of a giant elephant trumpets as it arrives just behind the marine fleet. The battle within Onigashima is nearing its conclusion. On the third floor, Raizo and Fukurokuju are still at a standstill with neither one of them releasing their paralysis jutsu, despite both being caught on fire. On the second floor, Jinbei helps some samurai escape by preventing them from being crushed by fallen debris and pointing out a route to their escape. On the performance floor, Chopper returns to his normal form and is now able to move. He worries for Zoro, whom he knows will be suffering twice as bad, due to the special medicine which was administered to him in exchange for his temporary super healing. Outside, Zoro is slowly bleeding out. As his blood seeps into the ground, he wakes up in a desolate area. A dark apparition appears before him, resembling a grim reaper. With its scythe, it prepares to swing at Zoro, who is frozen in place, calling out to the reaper to stop. Meanwhile, at the right brain tower, Frankie searches for Zoro. Elsewhere, Izu is finishing off the last of the beast pirates who have been relentlessly attacking him. Weakened, he is easily stabbed in the stomach by a pirate who he shoots to death. He staggers away, using the wall to keep himself up. As he makes his way out of the castle, he hopes that Kinemon and Kiku have escaped successfully. He comes across the CP0 agents who were after Robin. The agents tell him that they should pretend not to see each other, as they had no intention of going after the last remnants of the Whitebeard pirates, since their business right now is with the Straw Hats. Instead of letting them go, however, Izu tells them to stop. Yamato has finally reached the armory where the bombs are located. Kazenbo also reaches the armory, preparing to set fire to the explosives therein. Yamato transforms and uses his Namuji Hyoga technique, which freezes everything inside. He then swings at the Flame Spectre, determined to stop it from fulfilling the command given to it by Kanjuro and Orochi. It proceeds to engulf Yamato in flames, with the latter screaming in pain. Back at the performance floor, Big Mom continues to wreak havoc with her lightning attacks, knocking back Law and Kid. She remembers that Kaido is on the rooftop fighting Luffy, and wonders why she still has not heard the Emperor's shout of victory. She commands Hera to take her to the rooftop, but Law stops her with K-Room. He impales her with his sword and uses Shock Willa, causing her to fall. Kid proceeds to charge at her with his Punk Cornadio. As Kid and Law prepare to fight her once again, they vow that they will never let her go to the rooftop, even if it means their death. Eustace Kid is at the brink of death and his life flashes before his eyes. He snaps out of it when he hears Law screaming at him to do it. Outside, Momonosuke continues to pull Onigashima, determined to save everyone's life at any cost. He remembers his family and vows to save the land of Wano. He's momentarily distracted when he suddenly hears someone calling out to him. At the performance floor, Big Mom wrestles with Kid's Cornadio and is knocked down, but only for a moment. She stands up with her right arm visibly shattered. She tells them that Law's shockwaves broke her ribs and acknowledges Law's strength. She heals her arm using her devil fruit by giving her bones life and having them repair themselves. Seeing Big Mom unleash her Hao Shoku Haki, Law tells Kid that he will be out of energy in the next barrage. Before he can ask Kid to coordinate their attacks, Kid demands not to tell him what to do. Big Mom calls to her homies Napoleon, Prometheus, and Hera and launches her Maser Saber, which cuts Kid's metallic bull in half. Kid uses a sign on Big Mom, magnetizing her and the tower behind her. She is flung towards its wall, unable to escape. Kid's metallic bull is launched towards her, so she tears the wall down and uses it to shield herself from Kid's attack. She sarcastically thanks Kid for putting the wall on her back. Kid ignores this and proceeds to attack her legs, causing her to freeze. Kid and Law bombard her with attacks and manage to damage her bit by bit. She is seemingly unable to keep up with the assault, but finally shields herself and counters, sending the two supernovas flying. The Emperor launches her Mother's Visit cannon, 3,000 Leagues of Misery technique. Misery, Big Mom's homie, appears before Kid and immediately lunges to attack him. Her continuous onslaught kills those who are nearby, and Kid's crew can only watch as their captain takes a beating. As Big Mom commands Misery to destroy her enemies, she notices the surrounding debris floating in air. Law suddenly uses Tact and sends a nearby tower to crush Big Mom. He uses K-Room, anesthesia, and stabs her in the chest. His sword extends beyond Onigashima and even to the earth's crust below. Big Mom tries to punch her way out of Law's grasp, but he holds on, determined to extend his sword deeper into the ground. His sword finally reaches the earth's magma pool, and Law proceeds to launch Puncture Will. Big Mom panics and cries out for him to stop. The technique creates a giant hole all the way to the ground. Law retracts his blade and moves away from Big Mom. Big Mom almost falls into the hole but manages to grab on. She commands Misery to burn Law to death, but Law shouts to Kid to do it. Kid appears ready to launch his attack. Big Mom eggs him on, saying that it will not be enough to take her down, but Law declares that her era has ended. Kid uses his damned punk technique and fires a beam at Big Mom, hoping to send the Emperor through the hole Law created. However, she holds on, unwilling to go down. Big Mom is cornered by Kid and Law, as Kid's damned punk attempts to knock her into the hole. As a last-ditch effort, she uses Soul Pocus and attempts to take 50 years from their lifespans, effectively killing them. However, as neither Kid nor Law feared her, the attack is rendered ineffective. Using his ability, Law creates an R-room, a room which attaches to her regardless of where she moves. As a homage to his mentor, Rocinante, he uses Silent, preventing Big Mom from making any sound as long as she remains inside the room. Misery attempts to aid Big Mom by attacking Law from behind, but Law uses his sword to slice her in half. Meanwhile, Kid uses a second damned punk, sending an even stronger ray which finally sends Big Mom falling into the hole. Big Mom falls and lands in the armory. She grabs one of the frozen bombs, unaware that they were explosive. The bomb explodes, blasting a second hole in the bottom of the island, causing her to fall towards the Wano country mainland. Yamato is able to block the explosion with a frozen piece of debris, preventing the other bombs from detonating. However, the explosion considerably damaged Kazenbo, causing it to retreat towards Orochi. The explosion causes the entire island to crumble. A wounded Zoro, who was resting on the edge of the island, falls off the island as a result of the island crumbling. Big Mom is sent falling towards the ground. She notices the Fire Festival celebrations at the nearby flower capital, prompting her to reflect on her childhood with Carmel, her failure to defeat Luffy on Whole Cake Island, and finally her involvement in the raid. She curses Goldie Roger for starting the Golden Age of piracy, posthumously promoting the proliferation of new, inexperienced rookie pirates. Big Mom falls into the magma chamber, causing a large eruption of lava. Witnessing the fall of one of the four emperors, Kid and Law's crewmates cheer over the captain's accomplishment as the two rest from their epic fight with Big Mom. As Momonosuke continues to move on Onigashima, he senses that Zunesha had appeared near the island. He deduces that Zunesha was one of the many companions of Joy Boy 8 centuries ago. The standoff between Raizo and Fukurokuju continues as Raizo is ablaze, and Fukurokuju's clothing begins to catch fire. Eventually, Fukurokuju is completely set alight. Unable to withstand the heat of the flames, he collapses and screams for water. Zunesha appears at Onigashima to aid the battle, but Momonosuke is unsure of whether to continue the battle. He explains to Yamato that it may not have been Oden's intention to liberate Wano country, if it endangered innocent lives. After a short battle, Izu was quickly overpowered by the agents, who both utilized Rokushiki to defeat him. However, as Maha fatally strikes Izu in the chest with a Shigan, Izu manages to shoot him down with his pistol, causing them to simultaneously take each other down. Guernica briefly laments Maha's downfall. He then continues his search for Nico Robin, but he receives an imperial order from the Five Elders. As the world government saw Luffy as an especially dangerous threat, they order Guernica to interrupt his battle with Kaido and eliminate him immediately as a precaution. Guernica reluctantly obeys the order, but he is unaware he is being followed by Drake. Komurasaki accompanies Orochi in his private chamber as he awaits Fukurokuju's return. Orochi becomes impatient and frustrated, but the ceiling suddenly collapses, crushing him under the rubble. Pressing her advantage, Komurasaki inserts a sea stone nail into Orochi's body, weakening him and preventing him from using his devil fruit powers. She plays Orochi's favorite song on her shamisen and reveals that the song was also the favorite of her father, Odin. On the Skull Dome, Kaido notices that Big Mom had been defeated by Kid and Law, and begins to mourn her, reflecting on how they met while serving Rock's crew. Luffy takes advantage of Kaido's emotional state and transforms into his Gear 4th Snake Man form, declaring it his final Gear 4th. Luffy's punches are too Kaido to predict and defend against. In the connected hallway, Fukurokuju completely catches fire and collapses to the flames. Raizo makes his final remarks to him before he succumbs to his injuries. Jinbei appears and extinguishes the flames using Fishman Karate before coming to Raizo's aid. Meanwhile, Guernica is ambushed by Drake before he could advance to the rooftop. being stabbed by Drake's sword. However, Guernica retaliates, striking down Drake with a single Shigen. He then proceeds to follow his order, proceeding to the rooftop. On the rooftop, Luffy's Gear 4th techniques initially succeed against Kaido, but falter as Kaido retaliates. Kaido transforms into his dragon form, swallows Luffy, spits him out in the air, and strikes him with a bolo breath, sending him crashing through Onigashima and falling towards the sea. Luffy is forced to transform into his Boundman form to avoid falling into the sea. As Luffy's body will only sustain his Gear 4th form for a limited amount of time, he only has a limited opportunity to defeat Kaido with the last of his remaining strength. However, as he clashes with Kaido's intoxicated form, Guernica interrupts the battle, restraining Luffy to give Kaido an unfair advantage. To his own horror, Kaido strikes him down, knocking him out. Taking a critical strike from Kaido's Kanabo, Luffy is defeated, deflating out of his Gear 4th form and collapsing. Unhappy with being given an unfair advantage, Kaido directs his rage at Guernica for intervening in the battle. Guernica accepts Kaido's rage as he is struck down. Transforming into his dragon form, Kaido returns to the live floor, declares victory against Luffy, and demands the Alliance's unconditional surrender. He declares his intentions to continue the new Onigashima project, moving Onigashima to the flower capital, and subjecting the remaining citizens of Wano country to forced labor. The remaining Allied forces, despite being devastated by news of Luffy's alleged death, refuse to surrender, continuing the battle against the remaining beast pirates. Momonosuke, despite being demoralized after noticing Luffy's voice go silent, also decides not to end his struggle, continuing to move the island away from the capital. On the rooftop, Luffy's unconscious body suddenly regains a heartbeat. His body undergoes a mysterious transformation. Meanwhile, Zunisha likens Luffy's heartbeat the drums of liberation, a sign of Joy Boy's return. On the top of the Skull Dome, Luffy finishes his transformation, having fully awakened his devil fruit power. Meanwhile, the 5 elders at Mary Joieuse discuss having sacrificed Guernica in an attempt to stop Luffy. Being particularly concerned with the potency of the Gomu Gomu no Mi, the world government had been trying for years to attain it, but to no avail, almost as if the fruit were evading them. Despite being officially classed as a paramecia fruit, it is also a mythical Zoan fruit, the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika. The user, upon awakening their fruit, becomes the sun god Nika, having the power to manipulate his surroundings like rubber. Having fully recovered, Luffy emits extremely powerful Haoshoku Haki, which reaches the beast's pirates on the live floor below. He grabs Kaido's dragon body and drags it back above the rooftop, beating him upon the rooftop with little resistance. Kaido fires a bolo breath at Luffy, but Luffy blocks the fireball by pulling up on the ground. The fireball bounces off the wall and strikes Kaido. Despite being unable to hit Luffy, Kaido expresses relief that Luffy was alive, unhappy with defeating him thanks to Guernica's help. Meanwhile, in the treasure repository, Orochi attempts to cajole Hiyori into removing his sea stone nail and setting him free. However, following his numerous betrayals and wrongdoings against Odin and the people of Wano country during his reign, Hiyori angrily refuses. Kazenbo, who had been reduced to a small wisp by the armory explosion, appears, returning to its master. Orochi commands Kazenbo to burn Hiyori alive. However, Kazenbo does not listen, instead setting Orochi aflame as he remains trapped under the rubble. Kaido correctly deduces that Luffy had awakened his paramecia power, which has now become a Zoan ability. In his dragon form, he attempts to swallow Luffy whole, but Luffy beats him from his insides, inflates himself inside his belly, and forcefully launches himself out of his mouth. Kaido then attempts to strike Luffy with a bolo breath, but Luffy is completely unaffected by the attack. At this point, Yamato and Momonosuke travel to the rooftop to investigate the strange battle, discovering Luffy's awakened form. Luffy fuses himself with the sky, allowing him to grow to a gigantic size. Kaido strikes Luffy with Warai Jogo Ragnaraku, using his lightning-enhanced Hasaikai to strike Luffy, smashing his head into the rooftop and causing the Alliance on the live floor below to witness Luffy's awakened form, as Nami, Tama, Chopper, even Law and Kid were shocked seeing the giant head. With Marco surprisingly curious about Luffy's appearance, Kaido and Luffy briefly collapse, both too tired to continue to battle. However, the battle quickly resumes, and Luffy transforms back into his awakened form. He strikes Kaido with a punch which deforms Kaido's face, launching him into a rock wall. Luffy declares he will become the Pirate King before resuming the battle. Kaido laments the damage his crew had taken during the raid, having lost all his top officers and having his castle destroyed by battle. He continues his battle with Luffy on the Skull Dome, and as Luffy launches himself into the air, he gets the idea of utilizing the lightning bolts in the sky. Below inside the Skull Dome, the Allied forces are separated and cornered by the spreading fires. Chopper reunites with Nami and Tama, but fail to locate any other allies or combat the fires. Brook, Robin, Apu, and Number Inbi are trapped in the basement. Sanji and the other women are cornered in the left brain tower. Usopp's group, Frankie and Zoro, are also trapped in the corridors, and Mink forces are trapped on the 3rd floor. On the 4th floor, Raizo and Jinbei carry out a plan to extinguish the flames. Using his Devil Fruit ability, Raizo summons a scroll producing vast quantities of water. Then, using a fishman karate technique, Jinbei controls the water flow and floods all parts of the Skull Dome, extinguishing the flames and saving the Allied forces below. However, outside Onigashima, Yamato pressures Momonosuke to create flame clouds to support the island. As Kaido's power is rapidly declining, the flame clouds he created are weakening and about to collapse. Momonosuke needs to create his own flame clouds before this happens, or Onigashima will fall and crash into the mainland. Yamato encourages Momonosuke to make large flame clouds, but he claims it's easier said than done. He then thinks back to the day his home was destroyed, when his mother, Kozuki Toki, told him to flee to the future. He admitted he felt he couldn't unless she and his sister accompanied him, but Kinemon reminds him that in the land of Wano, when one suffers a great failure, they forfeit their life, and therefore, he can't question the resolve of his mother. He retorts that he is just a kid, but Kinemon says that with Odin gone, he isn't just his heir anymore. With tears in his eyes too, Kinemon begged for Momonosuke to give him another chance to fight, rather than die a shameful death by fire. Though he was reluctant, Momonosuke agreed to leave his mother behind with his followers. In the present, Momonosuke regains his own conviction and declares that he would never be able to face his mother if he gave up now, and continues to try and stop the island. On the roof, Kaido remarks on how Luffy was able to actually grab lighting, as Luffy uses a new move called Gomu Gomu no Kaminari, and hurls the lightning bolt at Kaido. Kaido, however, sidesteps it and smacks him with Hasaikai, sending him flying off only for Luffy to grab another lightning bolt and swing around and back at Kaido with an inflated leg. Before he can use another move, though, Kaido dodges and strikes Luffy on the head, where he declares that in the end, a strong devil fruit power isn't enough to conquer the seas, revealing that Gol D. Roger himself had no devil fruit power yet. He was still able to become the Pirate King. Luffy gets propelled down to the ground, which bounces him back up, and as he tries to defend himself, Kaido yells that to conquer the seas, the one thing that truly matters is Haki. He then hits him with Daitoku Raimei Hake, which injures Luffy, but he still grabs Kaido and starts dragging him up with him to the sky, only for Kaido to try and shake him loose, while changing into his full dragon form to blast him with Tatsumaki Kaifu, acknowledging that even with his awakened power, he's still weak to slashing attacks. While that was going on, the people of the Flower Capital watch their sky lanterns float up into the air with the hope that their wishes will reach the heavens, as they know they will return to being slaves again. Kaido then blasts Luffy with Bolo Breath to get him to let go while demanding he gets back down. In the castle, while the fire continues to rage on in some parts of the island, Hyogoro is informed that the island is falling, which he says is because Kaido is at the end of his rope. He asks everyone what outcome they would prefer, Luffy defeating Kaido and causing the island to fall and potentially kill everyone, or Kaido to win and extend everyone's lives by only a little while. The samurai immediately say they're okay with dying as long as the innocent continue to live, and they cheer for Luffy to fight without worrying about them. Some beast pirates retort that they may all die, but Hyogoro doesn't mind. In the basement, Usopp and Hamlet are running for their lives from the raging fire, only to get swept up in Reizo's water, to their relief. On the treasure repository floor, Orochi has managed to get the sea stone nail out of his body, allowing him to transform while still on fire, though he is reduced to one head left. Still, he proclaims that if he dies, he will spite Oden by taking Hiyori with him. Back on the roof, Luffy tells Momonosuke to get the island out of the way as he inflates his hand to a humongous size coated in haki to finish Kaido with. Momonosuke tells Luffy that he cannot move Onigashima out of the way, but the memory of his family compels him to try anyway. Kaido tells Luffy that he will take his attack head-on as he starts covering himself in fire, a move called Kane Daiko. While doing so, he tells Luffy that Odin died 20 years ago by burning to death, and ever since then, Wano became a lawless land filled with people desperately waiting for their savior to appear. The fire causes Luffy to let go, which Kaido says is the right call, and that he had no intention of running, though it was because he was confident Luffy would not be able to crush him with his fist because he would vaporize it. Kaido then performs a move called Shoryu, Kain Hake, while Luffy uses Gomu Gomu no Bajrang Gun, all the while thinking back to when Hyogoro taught him advanced grade Busoshoku Haki, and the two attacks clash. Inside the castle, Usopp tries to keep Kinemon and Kikunojo from drowning, and the other samurai cheer for Luffy to defeat Kaido, with Kawamatsu saying that unless Kaido is defeated, then their long nightmare will not end. He thinks about when he and the rest fled the Flower Capital after Odin was killed, and Orochi yelled that they would most definitely head back to Kuri to protect Momonosuke, only for Kaido to say he would take care of him himself. As a result, several loyal samurai were struck down by Kaido, and the castle was burnt to the ground. Kozuki Toki was pronounced dead in Bakura town, and no one else was found, which led to Orochi believing the Kozuki line had finally ended. After that, Orochi and Kaido confronted the remaining daimyo to see who they would side with, and they all quickly picked up arms against them, saying they refuse to recognize a shogun that is not Odin and will avenge him. Sadly, they did not stand a chance against Kaido, and because of that, none of them could depose Orochi, who continued to enjoy tormenting his people. Their actions would lead to several samurai being imprisoned and forced to work as slaves by the beast pirates, the factories polluting the water, and eventually killing all the crops. Still, several samurai kept believing in Toki's words. Orochi would later start feeding the people of Ebisu Town faulty smiles to make them only capable of smiling and laughing, even when they are actually sad, which he said was a fitting fate for them all. In the present, Orochi, still on fire, tries to attack Hiyori, but Denjiro arrives in time and slices Orochi's final head off, ending the psychotic shogun's reign for good. Surprisingly, one of the wishes written on the sky lanterns was, "Please make Orochi disappear," while another one is, "Free us from this hell," which Luffy is still working on with his clash with Kaido. During their clash, Kaido commends Luffy for making it this far, but he believes he can never change the world. Kaido then thinks back to his youth. When he was 10 years old, he was already formidable in his home of Vodka Kingdom. A few years later, however, the kingdom was revealed to be struggling to make ends meet with the heavenly tribute, resorting to going to war to seize loot to pay for their position in the world government. In order to guarantee a spot in the Levely, and because they could not handle him anymore, the king of the country offered up the young Kaido to the world government, much to his personal fury. Still, he was able to escape the Marines' custody, earning himself a bounty and a rumor that he only gets captured to eat something on the prison ships. 2 years later, on Hachinosu, Kaido furthered his reputation with his formidable strength, which led to Edward Newgate bringing him to Rocks, news that shook the world. Eventually, the Rocks pirates fell and Kaido struck out on his own. As he was forming the Beast's pirates, he was approached by Kurozumi Higurashi, who offered him a proposition that led to his alliance with Kurozumi Orochi in Wano. Kaido accepted her terms, and much later, he declares he will teach the peace-loving nobles the hellish nature of war, and create a world where one's worth is determined by strength. Later, he confides to King that he overheard Yamato Mentian Joy Boy, and if he is the person King is waiting for, then he knows exactly who he is. In the present, Joseph decides to flee as Yamato cheers for Momonosuke to create large flame clouds, which he desperately tries to. Inside the castle, Raizo and Jinbei's water reaches the rest of the interior, swallowing up everyone and putting out all of the fire before flowing out of the island. Everyone tries to hold on for dear life, and down in the treasure repository, Denjiro commends Hiyori for enduring her suffering for so long for this moment, which brings her to tears. However, Kaido's flame clouds have completely disappeared, meaning the island will fall soon. Kaido asks Luffy what kind of world he wants to make, just as Momonosuke finally produces his own flame clouds to support the island. As for Luffy, he tells Kaido that he wants to create a world where his friends can eat as much as they like, as his fist tears through Kaido's fire dragon and punches him in the face, sending him straight and deep into the ground. Momonosuke drops Onigashima safely near the flower capital and passes out from exhaustion, as does Luffy. In the past, Kaido told King that Joy Boy is the man who will no doubt defeat him, though King confidently believed he would never appear. Kaido changes back to his human form as he continues to sink in the ground, eventually falling into a huge magma chamber underneath Wano, which is also what happened to Big Mom. As a result, several fissures start forming underneath the seas of Wano. Yamato catches Luffy as he changes back to normal and passes out, and he commends both Luffy and Momonosuke for their actions. Meanwhile, in the flower capital, the fire festival finally starts dying down. Tengiyama Hitetsu thinks back to earlier how Toko was making her sky lantern, and how she found out that Shimotsuki Yasue let himself get captured, even though he knew he would be killed for his role as a daimyo in the past. When she asks why her father did such a thing, Hitetsu answered that he did so to give Wano another chance. Otherwise, the Alliance wouldn't have been able to fight this day. As she thinks back to the day he ate the same smile she did, so they could forcefully smile together, Hitetsu tells her that he hoped she could live happily, and touched by this, changes her lantern to instead read, "Thank you, Daddy," rather than, "I wish to see you, Daddy," which Hitetsu considered a huge honor. As Nekomamushi watches the sky lanterns, he declares to everyone across Onigashima that Luffy had beaten Kaido and Momonosuke stopped Onigashima from crash landing. And though the samurai were surprised to learn Momonosuke was a devil fruit eater, everyone was thrilled to learn that the war with the beast pirates was finally over, and they were able to prevail over 2 of the 4 emperors. As everyone celebrates, Usopp brings the unconscious Kinemon and Kikunojo to Chopper to treat, as does Frankie bring Zoro to him, and Miyagi and Tristan report that several others need his attention, which he asks them for help with. Outside Wano, Momonosuke tells Zunisha that he has decided to not open Wano's borders yet, and Zunisha accepts his wishes. He thanks him as he senses what he believes is an earthquake. The beast's pirates, however, refuse to believe that Kaido has lost since they are the crew of an emperor, and still believe they have the advantage in numbers. Frankie almost continues fighting, but Brook holds him back as Yamato steps up and tells the beast's pirates that everyone would have died if Onigashima fell like Kaido intended, and if they seriously want to keep fighting the people who saved them, he will personally take them down himself. Everyone then starts feeling the ground shake, and Babanuki is informed that unusual activity was occurring on the surface of the sea. Just then, a huge eruption occurs under the sea, and Luffy is officially declared the victor of the decisive battle. The people in the flower capital witness the explosion and become confused by both it and Onigashima outside. As everyone starts questioning what's going on, Momonosuke appears before his people, who initially mistake him for Kaido, but he clarifies that he isn't him and that the eruption was Kaido's final send-off. He changes back to his human form as several other people appear from the smoke, among them Hiyori in her Komurasaki guise, which surprises everyone as they all thought she was dead, and then Denjiro, who everyone still thinks is Kyoshiro. Denjiro tells everyone that the story is long, but he first wants everyone to meet Wano's new shogun. The people of the flower capital start to calm down after realizing that the large pink dragon they saw was not Kaido, and following Komurasaki and Kyoshiro is Kinemon, Kawamatsu, Inuarashi, Nekomamushi, Raizo, Shinobu, and Kikunojo, who the people recognize as the 9 red scabbards. Shocked by this unexpected turn of events, the people start clamoring for a picture Tanishi to transmit this historical development across Wano. Near Onigashima's crash site, Yamato finally meets the rest of the Straw Hats, and while some were surprised to learn he was Kaido's child, he assures them that he is not their enemy, and from here on out, he will be joining the Straw Hat Pirates. Usopp and Nami react with shock, Frankie confusion, Brook and Sanji with glee, and Robin with amusement. Jinbei, however, says he is not convinced until Luffy gives the say-so, which Yamato accepts, though right now, Luffy and Zoro are being treated by Chopper. Yamato notices some beast pirates fleeing and he and other gifters yell for them to stay put. Usopp then asks Tama how long her devil fruit powers last, and she reveals that the tamed gifters will turn back to normal after a month. She also says that the animals get to choose what life they prefer as some stay tamed, and Speed confirms this, saying she wants to remain by Tama's side, which she happily accepts, though she asks her to become her mother rather than her servant, which Speed becomes touched by. In the transmission, Momonosuke steps forward as the group bow to him, where he announces to all of Wano what has transpired. The citizens of Wano are shocked to learn he is the son of Kazuki Oden. He continues to announce that they are now free from the tyrannical reign of Kaido and Kurozumi Orochi, and they will no longer have to charge to drink clean water, that there will be no more slavery and the factories that polluted their once beautiful land will be destroyed. This causes Tama to think back to when her parents died working in the factories and how she was eventually found by Tenguyama Hitetsu, who assured her that the Kazuki family's warriors would return, which gave her the strength to keep going. In the present, she cries into Nami's arms as she remembers Luffy's promise to her. Momonosuke tells the people that on his voyage he met a powerful and passionate friend. Together they formed the Ninja Pirate Mink Samurai Alliance and invaded Onigashima. To everyone's surprise, Momonosuke announced that Kaido, Orochi, and the Beast Pirates have all been defeated. The people of Wano cheer as they are finally free of those villains. Though Momonosuke starts to grow nervous, he pushes through and announces his name, and his adult form is finally shown, where he declares himself Wano's new shogun. He asks the people of Wano to lend him their strength, and together they will return Wano to glory. Everyone is brought to tears by Momonosuke's proclamation, as Momonosuke reassures himself that he will keep his promise to his parents, after which he embraces his younger sister for a long-awaited hug. As Momonosuke and the group walk away, the narration reveals that Momonosuke will become known as Wano's greatest shogun. The five elders discuss two recent major developments in Wano country after being informed by the remaining CP0 agent, the emergence of Nika and the subsequent defeat of Big Mom and Kaido during the raid on Onigashima. An elder commented that the reveal of such information would be impossible to censor and are asking the other elders what to do. Meanwhile, the CP0 agent Joseph, who had returned to the world government fleet stationed outside Wano, reported that Zunisha has left the area. Another elder responds that the country will keep its borders closed and that an invasion will be thwarted, yet still asks the agent to capture Nico Robin. However, the agent is unable to hear the latter when their signal is being jammed by a mysterious voice who states for them to stay in position as they will be there soon. At the Onigashima castle, ex-Drake encounters Basil Hawkins, who is barely able to stand. Hawkins learns that Drake is still a member of the Marines, but the latter refuses to confirm. Hawkins then sits leaning at a pillar and reveals to Drake that he worked for Kaido, because he would not stand a chance if he refused. However, he also acknowledges how Eustace Kid and Killer continued resisting despite certain death. He then reveals to Drake that the certain man who has a 1% of surviving the raid was himself. He then faints. 7 days have passed since the end of the raid and the fire festival. At a school in the Flower Capital, a new teacher has replaced Sarahibi and revises the entire history course with a lesson on the life of Kazuki Oden. The citizens also learn that Komurasaki was Kazuki Hiyori and that Kawamatsu saved her from the burning castle. They also enjoy clean drinking water and an abundance of food. They also discuss that the man who defeated Kaido was someone named Joy Boy, but thought that he is no longer in the country. Meanwhile, at the graveyard in Ringo, Kawamatsu and Kinemon discuss the building of a temple dedicated to Kazuki Oden, including his fellow daimyo, and ending with a tribute to Ashura Doji and Izu. Onimaru returns to Kawamatsu, and Marco has also arrived at the temple. They also take into account those who are injured and prayed for their recovery. Yamato is seen sitting at the top of the former Orochi castle. He is then overjoyed after hearing from Hiyori that both Luffy and Zoro are awake and have fully recovered while kicking Momonosuke in the face. Luffy and Zoro also fails to acknowledge the grown Momonosuke and attempts to grab Nami to comfort him, only to be sent flying. Sanji and Brook then mock Momonosuke that they are welcoming him into the adult world, and that he can no longer have the privilege of staying with Nami. Yamato also teases him by putting a plate on his head. Nami then invites Yamato to take a bath together, noting that his prayers have been answered, but the latter refuses because there are no shared baths in the castle. Sanji also learns that Hiyori cleaned Zoro while he was recovering, which turned into a brawl between the two. Amidst the commotion, Kikunojo then joins the women in Yamato's stead. Yamato then joins the men as they bathed in the castle onsen, which caused Sanji to have another nosebleed. Nami then joins the female retainers in the female end of the onsen. After the bath, the citizens decide to celebrate the return of the Kozuki family as the shogun of Wano. Meanwhile, Frankie and Usopp are joined by Minatomo in fixing the ships as well as the General Frankie at the Tokaj port in Udon. Bepo and Killer are amazed by Frankie's robot, but Kid and Law and the rest of their crews not to become too attached with the other groups. Scratchman Apu then arrives being carried by Inbi. He brought a copy of the day's newspaper, the headline being the so-called New Emperors of the Sea and their new bounties. Meanwhile, Ryokugyu is flying in the air near the Wano mainland. He is talking with Sakazuki and was told not to cause any more commotions. In Mary Jawa's, Topman War Curie is yelling at a Marine telling him to reprint the newspapers and change the image of Luffy's bounty and remove the D from his name. The Marine tells him that the photo was sent in by CP0 agent Guernica. He also says that they can't contact the printing company. As the elder tells him to cease distribution of the newspapers, Morgans is seen laughing and saying that it's up to him to spread this news around the globe. He also says that Cypher Paul's transmission from Wano country broke off right after they encountered the Big Mom pirates ship. As a result, news of Big Mom and Kaido's defeat spread all across the world, and the three responsible for it, Monkey D. Luffy, Eustace Captain Kidd, and Trafalgar D. Waterlaw, were issued huge bounties as a result. Belly 3, 000, 000,000 each. This news shocks the Heart and Kid pirates as Scratchman Apu asks where Kid is going off to, and Killer suspects what he wants as he and the rest of the crew go off to celebrate, while Law calls the situation complicated. In the castle at the Flower Capital, a cook is seen making dishes for the big party. Jinbei is the only person in there and is drinking sake. Luffy, Yamato, and Chopper are having fun at the party and eating while Brook is having a concert playing Moon Princess, the song that Kozuki Hiyori used to play on the shamisen. Meanwhile, in the castle basement, Tenguyama Hitetsu finds Robin looking around. She asks why his collection of Kokeshi dolls are in the basement, and he reveals that it was once his secret hobby room before becoming his prison, as it also has a poneglyph present. Robin questions what he means since she thought he was a swordsman, to which he admitted he had talent in smithing but found it simply as a hobby since governing was so weary for him. That is when he takes off his mask and reveals that he is actually the former Shogun Kozuki Sukiyaki. Robin is shocked and asks him if Momonosuke knows that he is still alive, to which Sukiyaki replies that he doesn't, and that he has no plans to tell him out of shame for letting the country be overtaken by Orochi, although Sukiyaki suspects that his retainers have probably already deduced his identity. He says that when he got out and saw the state of Wano, he planned on committing seppuku there and then, but Robin cuts off his sentence by telling him that the poneglyph in the Arabasta kingdom revealed that the ancient weapon, Pluton, rests in Wano country, and she asks him if it truly does. Sukiyaki confirms, saying that it is in fact in Wano. At the former prison mine in Udon, Admiral Ryokugyu, whose real name is Aramaki, has subdued all of the beast's pirates imprisoned there, including King and Queen. It turns out he has the ability to turn his fingers into roots, which he uses to drain all of them of their liquids and other liquids nearby. Ryokugyu picks up a transmission and notifies the Marines to bring a warship to Wano, and also to not tell Sakazuki what he is doing before hanging up. Afterwards, he reveals that he finds Sakazuki's extreme methods cool and wants his approval, which he thinks he can achieve if he brings him Luffy's head. Speaking of, Luffy congratulates the Ninja Samurai Pirate Mink Samurai Alliance, retainers, Yakuza, and all of Wano for their outstanding victory. As Momonosuke watches, he remembers Luffy telling him not to tell the people who he is because he doesn't want to be called a hero. That's when Kid arrives announcing his intent to kill Luffy, but Luffy quickly grabs him and everyone starts partying. After a bit, though, Kid breaks free of Luffy's grip as he tells him he cares nothing for the party and simply came to kill him, though he does tell him that the outside world has announced the names of the new emperors, which are Red-Haired Shanks, Blackbeard Teach, Luffy himself, and in a surprising twist, Jester Clown Buggy. As for Ryokugyu, he approaches the capital while hearing the festivities, but says that he isn't in the festive mood considering the state the whole world is in now. As Ryokugyu continues walking towards the flower capital, he says that having the ability to sway others isn't something one can see often. However, he gets stopped by Denjiro, Inuarashi, Nekomamushi, Shinobu, Raizo, and Kawamatsu, all of whom Ryokugyu demands step aside. Raizo and Denjiro deduce that Ryokugyu is a marine, and is therefore Luffy's enemy, but Ryokugyu attacks everyone with his devil fruit powers, as he had consumed the Logia-type Mori Mori no Mi, and is therefore a forest man. While attacking, Ryokugyu tells the samurai that the world nobles are gods, and a country that has no ties to the world government, such as Wano, has no rights. He also tells them that humanity has only advanced so far because they enforce hierarchies, and non-affiliated countries have to be put in their place in order to keep the peace. Because according to him, prejudice breeds stability. As the six of them try to defend themselves, Ryokugyu announces that he will kill as many citizens of Wano as it takes to capture Luffy, since killing non-affiliated people isn't a crime in his book. Yamato then arrives on the scene and angrily slams Ryokugyu's head into the ground, telling him that everything he just said makes him sick. Ryokugyu recovers, and Yamato tells him that he will not let him spoil the people of Wano's newfound freedom after 2 decades. Ryokugyu, however, simply asks who he is, and Yamato introduces himself as Kaido's son, which shocks the admiral. Momonosuke then arrives in his dragon form and praises Yamato for his words, and he attempts to strike Ryokugyu by imitating Kaido's bolo breath, but nothing happens. Nevertheless, Momonosuke runs over to Ryokugyu and bites him, demanding he leave so he can continue to protect Wano from people like him. Ryokugyu, however, wraps his roots around Momonosuke to move him out of his way. Yamato tries to help, but Momonosuke demands he stay out of the fight. Meanwhile, in the seas around Wano, the red-hair pirates are waiting outside of the country. Some of Shanks' officers tell him that they should go see Luffy, though Shanks is too busy reminiscing about the last time he saw Kazuki Oden and his kids. As he looks at Luffy's new wanted poster, he thinks back to when he and his crew raided the world government ship that was transporting the Gomu Gomu no Mai, and after that the time he spent in Luffy's village up to when he lost his left arm trying to save him. After he finishes reminiscing, he tells his crew that he isn't going to meet Luffy in Wano, which shocks everyone. He reminds them that Bartolomeo made a mess recently in one of their territories by burning his flag and replacing it with Luffy's, and he wants to handle that situation. He does, though, ask Ben Beckman if he thinks it's time they tried to claim the One Piece. At the Marine headquarters in the New World, Fleet Admiral Sakazuki is told the world government can't ignore the Revolutionary Army anymore, and while Sakazuki knows this, there are no Marines left to deploy. The person he is talking to, Marine Criminal Affairs Unit Chief Kuruma, real name Tensei, tells him that Sabo has become legendary, because apparently he assassinated Nefertari Cobra, the king of Arabasta, and one of the descendants of the founding 20 from 800 years ago, which he thinks is a huge boon for the Revolutionary Army. On top of that, before Cobra was killed, he attacked Mary Jawaz and destroyed the symbol of the world nobles, which is practically a declaration of war. Despite Fujitora's and Ryokugyu's best efforts, Sabo and the other Revolutionary Army leaders were able to rescue Bartholomew Kuma and escape. Kuruma says that the two admirals were probably restricted from fighting in the Holy Land, but Sakazuki demands he not make excuses for them. It is also revealed that Cobra's daughter, Nefertari Vivi, disappeared too, and he is still investigating how Cobra's death and her disappearance are connected. Sakazuki surmises that Arabasta is in chaos now, while Kizaru, who was also present, asks if they can close the case on the attempted murder of St. Charlos. Kuruma, however, says that St. Miosgard excused the assailants, and in the Holy Land it falls to God's knights to mediate conflicts, but Sakazuki tells him to leave them to it. Kuruma says that most of these incidents are linked to Sabo, whose flames of rebellion are spreading all over the globe, and that 8 of the rebelling kingdoms were inspired to stage their coups while the kings were away. Now people are calling Sabo a god or the Flame Emperor, and whose influence is said to be even greater than Monkey D. Dragons himself. Kizaru also pointed out that on top of all that, his little brother was now one of the 4 emperors. Sure, enough a revolutionary that was rallying the troops claimed that Sabo's influence could be felt even in the pirate world, as his younger brother just upended their status quo, and right now times are being forced to change. Sakazuki remarks he became Fleet Admiral during a very intense era, but asserts that if the Revolutionary Army rears its head at them, he will intend to strike back on all fronts. Momonosuke once again tells Yamato not to interfere with his fight with Ryokugyu. Yamato asks why, but Momonosuke gets smacked to the ground by the admiral. Raizo uses Ninpo, Maki Maki no Jutsu, Keiton to burn Ryokugyu, who acts like it hurts before dropping the charade and revealing that he can make himself fireproof, citing he wouldn't have become an admiral if he couldn't defend himself from such an obvious weakness. He then stabs Raizo through the chest with his roots and starts draining him to his friend's fury. Despite the scabbard's best efforts, they are unable to permanently cut Ryokugyu's roots, and soon Denjiro, Kawamatsu, and Nekomamushi get wrapped up. Meanwhile, Kazuki Sukiyaki and Nico Robin are joined by Trafalgar Law, who deduce their location based on their absence from the festival. They make their way further down from Sukiyaki's secret room as the former shogun admits that Kaido and Orochi were still able to find the poneglyph underground because of Jack, since he is a fishman. Robin inquires what he means, and Sukiyaki explains they will understand soon. Law asks how far down it goes, and he says a few hundred years, just as the two notice a dim light coming from a glass block window. The two take a look through it and are surprised by what they see: an entire city underwater. Sukiyaki explains that what they are seeing is the Wano of old, specifically from 800 years ago, though he doesn't know how it ended up in such a state. Robin says that the city looks preserved, as if the water isn't seawater, and Sukiyaki proposes his theory. Long ago, Wano was much bigger and at sea level on the land around the base of Mount Fuji. At some point, though, walls were erected all around, which enclosed the island and prevented rainwater from finding release, which caused the old city to become submerged. The land further up the mountain was established for settlers, and eventually became the current Wano. The three finally arrive at their destination and discover a road poneglyph, marking it as the third one the Straw Hat Pirates need to reach Laugh-Tale, leaving only one left. Sukiyaki then says that if one were to travel a little deeper, they would find Pluton, but he himself hasn't seen it before, nor can he show them. He does reveal, though, that retrieving it requires the removal of the walls surrounding the country, meaning that opening the borders is quite literal. It also means that if the walls are destroyed, Wano won't be protected anymore, and Pluton will be unleashed onto the world. Robin asks why Odin wanted to open the land's borders if that was to be the case, but Sukiyaki says everything he told her was what was passed down to him as shogunate, and that he doesn't know what his son learned during his travels. Outside the flower capital, Ryokugyu tells the restrained samurai that he wouldn't have shown up if Kaido was still in charge, claiming that his presence, no matter how horrible it was, acted as a deterrent for potential. He once again demands Luffy be brought before him, promising to leave after he kills him. Yamato asks Momonosuke to call Luffy and the others to take Ryokugyu down, but he refuses to involve them. He also tells Yamato that he doesn't want to taint his send-off after being imprisoned for so long, and after relying on the Straw Hats for so long, he needs to prove that he and his retainers can fend for themselves once they leave. Momonosuke continues demanding that Ryokugyu leave, and he eventually manages to manifest Kaido's bolo breath, heavily damaging Ryokugyu. The Scabbards and Yamato react with amazement to Momonosuke's accomplishment as Ryokugyu's tree form burns to ashes. He is able to regenerate from a sapling and regain his tree form, where he announces he will kill him if he continues to stand in his way. However, Ryokugyu senses an incredibly strong blast of Haoshoku Haki coming from Shanks, which causes him to return to normal. He reacts with surprise that the Red Hair Pirates are nearby, as Shanks himself says that he thinks that going after the new generation of pirates while they have their guard down seems tasteless, asking if the new age scares him that much. His presence convinces Ryokugyu to abandon his mission, and the samurai and Yamato celebrate their victory. While in the flower capital, while everyone else is partying, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Jinbe, who were sitting by a hillside and noticing the fight, remark that their samurai friends were amazing and how intense Shanks' haki was to be able to drive Ryokugyu away. They don't know that it was him, though, but Luffy has his suspicions as Shanks sails away. Inside the flower capital's castle, Raizo and Shinobu are being nursed back to health by Miyagi and Tristan, while Kinemon is forced to admit Ryokugyu had a good point when referring to Kaido's presence keeping enemies at bay. He apologizes to the patients for not being there, before Nekomamushi brushes it off and asks Kinemon how Tsurujo was doing. Kinemon explains that she is safe and sound, with only a serious burn on her face despite Okobore town having burned down. He blushes while acknowledging her beauty even after all those years, while Inuarashi, Kikunojo, and Raizo express their feelings about Kinemon's sentimentality. Meanwhile, at the remains of Okobore town, Tsurujo and Chocho talk about Kinemon's return, and how Tsurujo plans to move back to the flower capital so she can continue to remain by her husband's side. Carrot is then called to the castle, and is announced to be the new ruler of Mokomo Dukedom, much to her shock. Inuarashi and Nekomamushi explain this decision by telling her that they chose to stay in Wano to serve Momonosuke, and leave the next era in her and the others' hands due to her experience at sea. Carrot disapproves, saying there are so many people stronger than her, but the Inuarashi Musketeer Squad and Wanda back up the decision by saying it's their job to protect their country, and that most importantly, she carries Pedro's will within her heart. Later, Kozuki Sukiyaki shows himself to his grandchildren and the Scabbards, assuming all of the samurai knew as well, which was true except for Kinemon, who internally expresses surprise to his survival. Sukiyaki tells them he can teach them a few things but will mostly stay secluded from the public, wanting to leave the future to them. In another room, Frankie and the rest of the Straw Hats learn from Robin that Pluton is indeed in Wano, but she hasn't seen it yet. Robin asks Luffy if he desires to obtain it, and he refuses, citing he doesn't need it. But Robin is left questioning why Odin wanted to unleash it on the world. A youthful-looking woman then butts into the conversation, which is revealed to be Shinobu, having regained her youthful form following Ryokugyu's attack. She is accompanied by Tama, who has become her kunoichi apprentice. Tama asks Luffy if she can join his crew, and he accepts following she masters ninjutsu. Caribou, who is eavesdropping nearby, is shocked by the truth about Pluton, and must let a certain person know about it. A few days later, the flower capital becomes busy again. At the castle, Momonosuke barges into a room to ask Zoro to teach him some sword techniques, only to find no one. He searches around the castle, and learns from Hiyori and Toko that they already left, having said goodbye to everyone except him and Kinemon. At Udon's Tokage port, Luffy, Law, and Kid choose their next destinations via log pose, the former two separating themselves due to their alliance having come to an end. Both Luffy and Kid pick to go east, while Law decides to go northeast, reasoning that it is the shortest route to reach an island. Luffy and Kid pick straws to decide who gets to pick the middle log, and Luffy loses while rubbing into Kid's face he is now an emperor even though he lost. While on the subject of emperors, Kid takes out a flyer and voices his strong dislike for Buggy and his new organization, Cross Guild. With former warlords Crocodile and Dracule Mihawk as his subordinates, he has become a powerful enough figure to obtain the title of emperor. Zoro voices his disbelief that Mihawk would become subordinate to anyone, and Luffy just calls Buggy an idiot. Still, Kid reveals that he's using his company to assign bounties to members of the Marines, remarking how so much changed in the outside world while they were in Wano. Law gives Kid a rubbing of Wano's road poneglyph, and the latter reveals his crew had managed to take one from Whole Cake Island some time ago. Killer states that in order to take part in the upcoming war over the One Piece, they need to find a man with a burn mark. Luffy questions him about it before Kid laughs as he tells Luffy they now have an advantage over him and his crew. Back at the castle, Momonosuke and Kinemon search for Yamato, who was on the roof the whole time. He announces his intent to join the Straw Hats and live like Kozuki Odin did. In the forest near Tokage Port, Momonosuke in dragon form is carrying Kinemon and Yamato on his back, as Momonosuke is surprised to learn that Yamato has chosen not to set sail with the Straw Hat pirates. The two are confused by this since he made a declaration that his mind was made up, and Yamato explains that he wants to walk in Kozuki Odin's footsteps, and he explored all of Wano first before he went out to sea, so he intends to start there too. Momonosuke becomes enraged that the Straw Hats were informed of all of this by him, yet they didn't bother to say goodbye to his face directly, which causes him to accuse them of snubbing him on purpose. He thinks back to his life from when his home was destroyed by Kaido to when he met Luffy, all their interactions, and ending with Luffy's declaration that he would stop Kaido. Both Momonosuke and Kinemon angrily agree to punish Luffy for his apparent rudeness and lack of true friendship, but Yamato believes they are overreacting. They eventually reach Tokage Port, where the Straw Hats, Heart Pirates, and Kid Pirates prepare to set sail as Momonosuke transforms back into his human form and tackles Luffy to the ground, with Yamato also doing so, albeit just to say goodbye to him. Kinemon tells Luffy that his leaving without saying anything has upset the Shogun, but Luffy simply says that it shouldn't matter if they are talking right now. Momonosuke then tells Luffy that he wants him to stay in Wano while breaking down into tears, explaining that he's scared about what the future holds without him since he helped him so much. Luffy, however, throws a flag on him, which Usopp painted the Straw Hats symbol on. Luffy reveals that they were waiting for him the whole time so they could give it to him, and though he looks like a man, he knows he is still a kid, but most of all, he sees him as a little brother. Luffy tells Momonosuke to look at the flag when times get tough to remember them by, and to hang it up somewhere in Wano to intimidate anyone who threatens his home. Momonosuke tearfully asks if this means he is a member of their crew, and Luffy confirms, adding that when he, Kinemon, and Yamato decide to become pirates, he will welcome them on board. The Thousand Sunny sets sail as the Straw Hats cheer Momonosuke on. Momonosuke turns to Kinemon and tells him that he will surpass his father one day, which Kinemon looks forward to. Once setting sail, Nami says they should head for the main port in Hakumai. That way they don't have to ride the waterfall like last time, much to Chopper and Brook's relief. Unfortunately, Kid taunts both Luffy and Law by saying that using such a safe method is for weaklings. This results in all three crews going down the waterfall, much to the frustration of the rest of the Straw Hats. In the Flower Capital, meanwhile, the tale of the raid on Onigashima is told to an audience of Wano citizens. The narrator says that the strength of the 3 pirate captains was enough to vanquish Kaido, who they called the Dragon King, and Big Mom, who they called the Olin the Great Yokai. The narrator also says that during the battle, Hiyori was accosted by Orochi only to be struck down for good by Denjiro. He goes on to say that Onigashima fell along with Kaido and freed the suffering country from their 20 years of hell. Suddenly, though, Orochi used the last of his life to tell Hiyori that the burning grudge of the Kurozumi family will curse Wano for eternity. But Hiyori, unfazed, approached him and told him that Kurozumi means charcoal. The Kurozumi were born to burn. The audience then roars with approval as Hiyori and Toko themselves appear to play music as the tale concludes. In the last scene, the arc concludes with Momonosuke wondering where they should put the Straw Hats flag as the curtain closes.
Ei, pessoal, acabamos. Acabamos, pessoal. O arco de Wano acabou. One Piece One acabou, pessoal, acabou.
Bora, mais um, toma.
Nós estamos no momento na unidade operacional de Santa Inês de Itaipu.
Acabou.
Essa foi aqui.
Terceira parte acabou.
Hum?
É o casamento. Bem, eu vou acabar o stream aqui, tá bem? Aqueles que estiveram comigo, obrigado por estarem comigo. Por estarem comigo. Muito obrigado aqui por participar do nosso stream do One Piece. Até o fim. Muito obrigado mesmo. Tá bem? Tchau.